is often said that true intelligence is the ability to see the future. But what if seeing the future begins with surviving the past? Today I'm going to ask you to do something bold with me. Together we're going to attempt to see into the future. But in order to do that, we have to start by revisiting our greatest teacher, the history that we've lived. And in doing so, we're going to learn how the concept of the blue economy was born in Mississippi. So to start, I would like to ask you to step into my time machine with me. We're going to set the dial back 20 years to the year 2005. Some of you remember it. 2005 was a far simpler time. Phones still had actual buttons. Netflix was something that came in the mail. And amazingly, Blockbuster Video was still winning that fight back in those days. If we stepped out of that time machine in the year 2005, where I lived at that time, just a few blocks up the beach from here, it would have looked far, far different. My home, along with tens of thousands of others, was completely destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina didn't just damage the coast, it nearly wiped it away. In fact, I think my old boss, Governor Barber, used to say it best. He would often say in his speeches, it was as if the Mississippi Gulf Coast was wiped away by the hand of God. And he was not wrong. Katrina damaged everything about our normalcy, everything about our livelihoods. It challenged everything that we had known. I remember walking to my neighborhood for the very first time after Hurricane Katrina. It took a few days because the roads weren't open. And when I was finally able to get back to where my neighborhood was, I had to park about 2 miles away and hike in. So I hiked down to Highway 90 along the beachfront, or what was left of Highway 90. Most of it had been scoured out by the incredible storm surge that came along. And I was passing 20-foot-high piles of debris. As you can imagine, the smell of death was in the air. And life was gone, completely gone. Businesses destroyed, first responders overwhelmed, and slabs as far as the eye could see. When I rounded the corner to where my home was, it took my breath away. Nothing was there. I could see my neighbor's car wrapped around a tree. I could see the toys from the children that lived in the neighborhood sticking out from under piles of debris. But Katrina didn't just destroy our belongings. It destroyed our systems. Think about it. Our hospitals were closed. Our schools were closed. Our local governments were knocked down flat. Our first responders were completely overwhelmed. The systems that we depend on for our normalcy were completely destroyed. But one thing that I learned after Hurricane Katrina was that those systems could be rebuilt. And I spent the next 10 years of my life working very deeply in that recovery effort. Not long after Hurricane Katrina hit, I joined Governor Haley Barber's Office of Recovery and Renewal, an office that I would later go on to lead. And that was the team that was responsible for rebuilding Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina, the largest rebuilding after a natural disaster in American history. Now, 20 years later, I still work in that industry, and I'm a consultant. I help local governments across the southeastern United States work to recover from major disasters. Now, the things I've learned within that 20 years, I could never fit into a talk of this length. But there's one lesson that supersedes all others. True recovery is not about simply rebuilding what was lost. True recovery requires you to reinvent yourself. And the blue economy was a product of that reinvention. So I'm going to ask you to step back into the time machine with me now. We're going to fast forward to the year 2014. I had just left state government at that time, just left the Office of Recovery, and I'd gone to work as an economic developer. I also used that opportunity to go back and complete my master's degree at Southern Miss in economic development. So by day, I was an economic developer focused on the traditional drivers of the local economy, industrial recruitment, job creation. And by night, I was a student focused on researching academically what was happening in economic development. And everywhere I looked, I kept noticing something happening. That water that sits off our beaches in the Gulf, the same water that had nearly destroyed us a decade earlier, was becoming the key to our rebirth. And I'm not just talking about the traditional backbones of our economy, shipbuilding, seafood, coastal tourism. I'm talking about the new industries that were springing up, that were leveraging technology, marine robotics, unmanned autonomous marine systems, huge advances in coastal research. It was like a symphony was playing, but with no conductor. Or worse, it was a symphony that didn't even know it was a symphony. And it was so important to me, I decided I had to act. So what did I do? I did what any good grad student would do. I wrote a 70-page master's thesis about it, filled with facts and figures and statistics and labor data and spreadsheets. But despite my best efforts to repel all human interest in the topic, someone apparently read it, or at least they read the cover page, because it was called Mississippi's Blue Economy. Now, pretty soon, Southern Miss picked up the terminology. They started using it in their programs and evangelizing it. And before we knew it, state agencies were using it. Federal agencies were using it. Even the governor began saying it in his speeches. And the concept was very simple. The water that had almost destroyed us was also the key to our survival. Everywhere we looked, there were new industries that were springing up with a nexus directly to the Gulf of Mexico. And in my academic work on the blue economy, I found that nearly 70% of the jobs in South Mississippi were directly connected to the Gulf of Mexico. It was our number one economic driver. And it was also the place that jobs were growing. And so we began talking about the blue economy. We began looking at how we could leverage that for our continued adaptation to this new normal that came after Hurricane Katrina. Because we realized one very important thing. If we could build with the water off our shores rather than against it, we had a chance for true resiliency. But I want to talk to you about what resiliency is going to look like in the future. You know, we always thought of disruptions as an event, a hurricane, for example. Think about what happened in the Mississippi Gulf Coast between the years 2005 and 2010. First, we had Hurricane Katrina. That was followed by the Great Recession that hollowed out balance sheets, that stopped many recovery projects before they even began. And it was capped off in 2010 by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. 3 generational events in 5 years' time. But we survived them all. And we didn't just survive the events, we survived the pattern. And that's very important because disruptions compound. They compound exponentially. It's not one event that you have to survive and get past. It's the compounding effect of it all happening at once. Let me give you a way to visualize that. Think of a chessboard with 64 squares on it. We're going to take one small grain of rice and place it on the first square. And then we're going to double it with 2 on the next square. And then double it again with 4 on the next, and so on. By the time we get to the 10th square on that chessboard, we've got a handful of rice. By the time we get to the 20th, we literally have a mountain. And by the time we get to the 64th and final square, we have more rice than has ever been harvested in human history. That's what compounding exponential disruption looks like. It seems like nothing is happening until suddenly everything is. And folks, I'm here to tell you, that's what the future looks like for us. And it's not a future that's far ahead. It's a future that we're already in. Think about what you already see happening. Just a few years ago, AI was a product of science fiction movies. Now it's a part of our everyday lives. And as we continue on over the course of the next decade, AI and automation and technology is going to change everything we know about our world in ways that we can hardly comprehend. I'll give you one example of that. Think about the American truck driver. Anytime we get on an interstate or a highway, we see trucks that are driven by truck drivers. It's one of the largest employment sectors in the United States, and it's the backbone of our logistics system. In 10 to 15 years, there will not be a truck driver left employed anywhere in America. They'll be replaced by autonomous, unmanned vehicles that deliver that cargo. The same is going to be true across our logistics chain. AI is going to replace jobs in the blue-collar sectors. As with automation, it's going to replace jobs in the white-collar sectors. This is all going to happen on top of other compounding disruptions: climate change, population collapse, and a lot of established economies. Huge advances in medical science and technology that will create expanded lifespans. In fact, the children being born today will likely be the first generation of human beings who will reliably live to be 120 years old or more. Think about that. And that's going to be happening at a time when some experts estimate that by 2035, nearly 80% of the jobs that exist today will have changed fundamentally. You know, I think about my grandmother when I talk about this. My great-grandmother. She was born in the year 1900, and she died in the year 2000. She lived to be 100 years old. And I think about her as a young child growing up in the piney woods of South Mississippi, before there was ever a paved road, before anyone had ever seen electricity, when transportation was still accomplished with a horse and carriage. She saw more change in her lifespan than in any lifespan in human history. And what's going to happen during the next 100 years is going to dwarf what happened in the 20th century. We literally cannot comprehend how much different our world will be in the year 2100. That's where the compounding disruptions happen, and that's where it happens exponentially. And what do we need for that world? We need a new kind of model. If the 20th century model was like a factory, think about a factory. Factories are efficient, they're structured, but when their systems break, the factories fail. In the 21st century, we have to have a model like the blue economy. The blue economy is actually much more like something we understand here in coastal America: the coral reef. Think about a coral reef. It's interconnected, interdependent, symbiotic. Each species depends on the other for their survival. Now, reefs face compounding disruptions all the time. The edge of the reef is always the first thing that faces the coming storm. And reefs have to learn how to adapt. They have to learn how to be resilient. They have to learn how to live with the reality they're given. And what do when they face disaster? They rebuild life on the architecture of the infrastructure that was destroyed. That's exactly what we identified happening in Mississippi with the blue economy. And it might just be the best model that we have for the way we have to face the challenges of the future. But it's not just a model for economics. It's not just a model for industry. It's also a model for people. I'd like to share with you a story that is very special to me. Many of you probably know First Lady Marcia Barber, who was our First Lady during Hurricane Katrina. I got to know her incredibly well over the years. Leading the Office from Recovery meant that I had to oversee every disaster that hit Mississippi over the decade I was there. And Miss Barber was our best first responder. She always went to where the storm hit. So I often spent a lot of time riding around with her, touring areas that had been devastated. And she would relay to me a story about the first few days after Hurricane Katrina. Miss Barbara was very concerned that help wasn't getting into the areas that were hardest hit. And so she used the many contacts that she had to get 2 law enforcement agents, state law enforcement agents, to load up a truck full of supplies. She climbed in the back, and they set off for areas that had not yet been accessed by first responders, so they could pass out food and water. She told me that they turned down a dirt road because they wanted to see if anyone lived down the road. And when they came around the corner, they found a man and 2 young, small children standing out in front of a double-wide trailer that had been crushed like a beer can. They were living in their front yard. She got out of the truck and she said, "We have some supplies here. Can we leave some with you? Is it just the 3 of you?" And she said, "No, ma'am." He said, "No, ma'am. It's actually my wife and my 8 children that live here." And she said, "Good. We've got plenty of supplies. We're happy to give you all that you need, and we can get more help to you." And as the agent started unloading the truck, the man said, "That's plenty for us. If you have more, there's an old shut-in that lives across the street, an old lady. She's not doing well. Take some of them to her, please." And he said, "Look, we've got enough for her as well, but we need to make sure you guys are taken care of." And he said, "Well, look, if you've got enough, if you turn down this next dirt road, there's 6 or 8 families that live down there. We don't need any more. Take some to them because nobody's been down there to help them." That's what's at the heart of the blue economy. Those are the people who have lived their lives on the water, the people that understand its challenges. That's what the reef model is: symbiotic, interconnected. We depend on each other. And I'm going to be honest with you. That might be the hardest disruption of all for us to overcome, because it's ultimately, we live in a society that is very divided. I can promise you, in the debris fields after Hurricane Katrina, nobody was checking a party registration. They didn't care if you were a Democrat or a Republican. If you were going to give a hand to help, they were willing to take it. And that's what we have to get back to. So we've talked today about the blue economy and what it represents. But here's the really important part. It's a model for our civilizational future, not just Mississippi's. The storm didn't end our story. It just gave us the pen to write the next chapter. Thank you.